Good evening, everyone. Jai Bhim. Welcome to this special session of Digital Nalanda. We are celebrating our emancipators' birth anniversaries, and we call it Mukti Parv. And in this, we are announcing the launch of our School of Buddhist Studies, and with an inaugural lecture by Professor Bodhi from the prestigious Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. The topic, the inaugural session is on Babasaheb Ambedkar and the 6 historical Buddhist councils. Very much important topic in and very much rooted topic in Buddhism. So,
thank you, Subodh. Thank you so much. I think it's very important that we come together and celebrate this particular occasion. Not only our emancipator, but someone who's shown us the way and where we should go and what path we should walk. Based on the kind of topic that we have been discussing and the need for us to discuss this topic, we have agreed that probably this is where we should begin. As in, what are these 6 historical councils and what are their significance to Buddhism? So we who are following Babasaheb and the kind of path that he kind of directed us to walk based on his intense engagement with the social reality that he was experiencing at his point in time. Important for us now to begin to understand Buddhism in the light of this historical movement. So I will run through some of these ideas because these are mostly historical, and they are something that you can anybody can access because it's available in the internet. It's not that something that is not easily available. And among us who are followers of Buddhism and the followers of Babasaheb, we are all quite aware about some of these debates. So the question here is not about giving any new insights, but the question is to lay the framework on how we should begin to look at Buddhism and look at Babasaheb, and why it is so important for us to do that. So based on the discussion we've had and the question that some of you have posed of what are these 6 historical councils and why are they so important to Buddhism? I will kind of just run through and probably we can have a discussion. I always prefer to have a dialogue. I think Buddhist pedagogy is dialogical. Buddhist pedagogy is not a sermon. It's not a lecture. You can learn from sermons and lecture, but it's always far more deeper when you begin to engage in dialogue, because we begin to enter the domain of what you understand called deeper insights into reality. And it's experiential learning. It is what I call processual learning, contextual learning, related to your life, your meaning-making project, your search for your own sense of who you are and your own truth. At the same time, very, very dialogues are very rational. We need to understand each other. You can't be, the speaker can't be speaking something else, and the person who's kind of engaging is asking something else. So let me run through these. The first thing we need to understand about Buddhism is that if you look at the history of Buddhism, how is it that we, 2,500 plus years, for instance, in 1956, we celebrated 2,500 years, and now we're in 2021. So how is it that 2,500 odd years, the teachings of Shakyamuni, the teachers of the Sakya community, the enlightened one, the one who was awakened to his own reality and the reality of the universe as a whole, how is it that his teachings has come to our lives at this particular point in time, 2,500 years after he died? So one of the ways in which Buddhism tends to engage with this kind of a question, is to first begin to realize that many of the things that has come to us because of a certain process, a certain pedagogy in which Buddhism has employed over these 2,500 years. The traditional way of preserving the teachings of Shakyamuni in the initial days, after he passed away, was by commitment of every word into memory. People committed every word of Shakyamuni by memory, into memory. And it had to be refreshed every time by subsequent, what you call subsequent councils in the Sangha. Because it was basically a passage of words, the usage of memory, it also had to be refreshed from time to time, because language sometimes can change. When you carry, sometimes your accent can change. Even your accent will bring a new kind of a meaning to a word. So constantly they had to be refreshed in the Sangha. So one of the ways you will see in every Buddhist thing, they go and kind of they speak the suttas. They refresh the suttas. They memorize the suttas. This is part and parcel of what you understand about Buddhist pedagogy. Now, we have to make a distinction. When Buddhists memorize the suttas, these are teachings, because they have come through a very oral way of transformation or transmission of the suttas, the teachings of Shakyamuni to the people year after year for thousands and thousands of years, 2,500 years. It is not the learning by heart of the word of God. Buddhism is not about the teachings of the teacher or the teachings of the teacher. They are not words of a God. And we don't memorize them as though they are words of God. No, these are words of a teacher. And we can go into the details of what the teacher himself said, noting that, my words and my teachings can be adaptive or processual, or contextual. How you will interpret them, how you will engage with them, what meaning you make from time to time depends not on your context and the kind of reality you live in. So don't take it as, so rigid. It's important to keep the purity of the suttas, but in terms of interpretation, you should be open. I mean, this is the beautiful thing that we in Buddhism kind of, to a great extent, gives us a lot of space, to begin to make meaning, and at a very individual level, at the same time, a very social level. So, these kind of this way of learning work very well for the elders, what you call the theras in Buddhism, we call the theras, the elder among the bhikshus, the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, among the bhikshus. It's a very and the language that was employed was Pali. I mean, there are a lot of debates about this. I don't want to go into the debate. Some people say, no, he spoke another language. Some people said, no, that language was what went to Sri Lanka, as the language was different. It got later translated to Pali. We will leave that debate for now. But let's just assume that Pali was the language that Shakyamuni spoke, and Pali is the language that the suttas got recorded in memory. And when it got even written down, it was written down in the same language that Shakyamuni had used. Now, the records of what I will speak about, the councils, are available everywhere in the Tipitakas, and even the other later Pali kind of writing that people did. So, another point which is important to note is that, the oral recitations or rehearsal of these suttas in council or in the Sangha, and the council in the Sangha, then there are many words. Some people say Sangayama, some people say Sangiti. There are many words in Buddhism which is used to refer to a large gathering of a Sangha, in which many of the theras or many of the elderly, more wise, bhikshus have been called to congregate. Like in our sense in India, we are Sangha. We also have our own Sangha, the Navayana Buddhist Sangha. We have some, 30, 40 of us. And there are other many Sanghas in there. But, if all of them congregate one, especially the elderly one, the wise one, those who at least in the typical Buddhist language, the Arahants, or even let's say the Bodhisattvas, when they come and congregate, these are generally what is called the councils. So it was a recitation procedure, plus the trained memory of the individual, work that caused the original wording of the master. It kind of committed itself, this oral recitations or rehearsal in council. It was the recitation, it's the procedure of recitation, plus the trained memory. How do you recite these suttas? And how do you memorize them? And of the individual work that caused the original wording of the master, so that all that you recite and all that you record in memory is exactly the words of Shakyamuni, as much as is possible. Yeah? And this was intended for future preservation of his words. It was intended to preserve his work in the future and to remain unaltered against passage of time. So, 2,500 years is a long time, but still we have today these words that basically came from Shakyamuni as much as possible. So the first point before we get into the debate is to begin to understand that Buddhist way of passing the words of the Buddha, many councils have taken place. And each of these councils was to refresh, to see that there are no distortions, to see that there are no infiltration, to see that there are no new meanings that are not meanings, but new ways of writing, even in Pali also. And every council tried to actually do this. This is exactly what they tried to do. But while every council tried to do this, it is important to note that the context in which these councils were called was very, very different. Now, how are they different? If you look at the first council, you see, first council was very interesting. It was supposedly held 3 months after the death of the Buddha, the death of Shakyamuni. And around, people say around 544 BCE, before the Common Era. And it was called in a cave. It's called the Sakyamuni caves, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not very good in Pali, the pronunciation. Even in Hindi also, I'm very bad in this pronunciation. And it was called in Rajagraha, Rajgir. Current day, it's just close by to Nalanda in Bihar, in this current state of Bihar. There was an elder, Mahakasapa, who was, after hearing the death of Shakyamuni, had to come from one particular place and go to the funeral. And it took, it seemed, 7 days. And on the way, when we were walking there, Mahakasapa, who was the eldest, bhikshu, overheard one of the elderly disciples or elderly followers. Let me not use the word disciple, but elderly followers, elderly bhikkhus, who had just recently joined, called Shubhada, who basically, when he was asked, when he saw that many people were, in grief, in sadness that Shakyamuni has passed away, he was have responded in a manner by saying that, why do you have to grieve? Why do you have to feel sad? Actually, now it is much better for us, because now the rigid rules that was there for the Sangha, especially for those people who had taken, bhikshuhood, now it will be a little bit less strict. And this less strict is important. Now we are a little free a little bit from these rigidities of the practice. So the minute the elder Mahakasapa heard about this, and he realized, my goodness, this can lead to a tremendous amount of distortions of the teachings of Shakyamuni. And in that particular sense, immediately, he decided that he will call a council. And this came to be called the first council. And in this first council, there were two very, people who are very close to Shakyamuni. One is Upali, one is Ananda. And Upali was basically called in order to state exactly the rules and the regulations and the frameworks by which the practice of bhikshuhood, of one who was taken bhikshuhood, for instance. And what are these rules? What do they have to follow? What do they have to eat? How do they have to live their life? What are the practices we need to do? What are the kind of, probably meditation that they have to practice and so on and so forth? And Mahakassapa had tested this with Upali, and from this kind of a conversation and dialogue, and it seems nearly about 499 plus 1, 500 arahants were called to this council. And when Mahakassapa had asked Upali, Upali was basically responding to the questions of Mahakassapa. And in this response, they were able to now and then speak in front of 500 people who have been very close to the teaching of the Buddha and have attained arahanthood, which means some degree, a great degree of mental purity. And all of them agreed. And from this kind of a dialogue, this kind of a usage of a pedagogy, of a very interesting pedagogy in the Buddhist context, was born the Vinaya Pitaka, was born the rules, the rules of Bhikshu, the rules of the Bhikkhus and the Bhikkhunis. Then another very close attendant of Shakyamuni, Ananda, who was with him for 25 years, following, listening to discourses given by Shakyamuni in various places across North India, for instance. He was called in order to explain some of these discourses. And in the same pedagogy used, he also stated in what basically was a conversation between Ananda, Mahakassapa and the 499 arahants, was born what is generally called the Sutta Pitaka, or generally the Dhamma, the teachings of Shakyamuni. Now, it seems all of this process in the first council took about 7 months. All of this took about 7 months. And this historic council was generally called the Panka Sattika, if I'm not mistaken, because of the 500 number of arahants. That's exactly how it is. So it is here for the first time that, as I said, they began to lay down the suttas, they began to memorize these suttas, okay, and they kept for the first time the teachings intact. Because in the understanding of the elder Mahakassapa, it would have gone haywire, there would have been distortions. Just in 7 days itself, the distortion has started to take place with people who are basically. But what is important to understand is they were more concerned, as much as they were concerned with the suttas taught in terms of discourse, they were very concerned about the practice. The first council was very concerned with the practice. They didn't want the practice to lose the framework in which Shakyamuni had given as a teaching to the people who basically took bhikshu. Now, so this was 3 months. The second council was it seems was held 100 years after the death of Shakyamuni. And the second council was very interesting because it was supposed to settle some dispute. I mean, I have been reading about this, and because I'm not a bhikshu myself. I come more from academics, engaging. I'm a staunch follower of Babasaheb, and I read his texts and I read Buddhist texts, but I'm not a bhikshu, so I don't really get the nitty-gritties of this second council. It was supposed to kind of resolve some serious disputes, over some 10 points, in which some of the bhikshus were supposed to have broken some of these very 10 points. And these 10 points are, something like storing salt in a horn, and eating after midday, and eating once and then going for alms all over again, and using gold and silver, accepting gold and silver, the 10 of them, and it was supposed to be a dispute about this. So this particular dispute so happened that there was a senior Thera, Thera Yasa, Yasa was the bhikshu's name, who came to know about this, and he had to confront this very large group of what is generally called the Vajjan. Now, Vajjan, many people, I've seen many texts, people say Vajjan was a group of bhikshus who were in a particular vihar. People say Vajjan was a town. People talk about Vajjan as a confederacy. We have 6 BCE itself. 600 BC itself, the Vajjian confederacy was there. It was called the Vajji Mahaja Napada, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like some people were referring to it as a confederacy, some people were referring to it as a kingdom, some people were referring to it as a town, in which some of these bhikshus who were followers of Shakyamuni had kind of broken the rules. So they were not, some small group of people. They were people with, quite a lot of state support and so on and so forth. So this second council was called in Vaishali, Vaishali. It was called at the time Vaishali, basically northern of Patna, if I'm not mistaken. It's in Bihar only. And the elder Thera Yasa, who came to know about this, basically, he was, he kind of confronted, and in that confrontation, the so-called, we call them the Vijjayan bhikshus, they kind of expelled Thera Yasa. And the minute they expelled, Yasa then escaped, and he met, some supposedly 60 forest-dwelling bhikshus from Panna and 80 bhikkhus from the southern region of that particular place. And they together went to another bhikshu who was called Soraya, who consulted what we know to be called Veneral Revata, a very highly revered bhikshu. So, in order to settle the dispute, Veneral Revata advised to call this Sangha, this council, call this council. And in this council was supposedly sponsored by King Talasoka. So there was a lot of state sponsorship for these kind of events, which is very important. The first one I forgot to mention was sponsored by King Ajasattu. Some people say Ajasattu, but in Pali we say Ajasattu. So in this particular second council, sponsored by King Talasoka, it seems 8 bhikkhus had come to vote, and the eight were called to judge, and I forgot the names of one of these 8, but they gave a verdict, and this verdict was how to maintain the purity of what you understand called the teachings in the Vinaya, and the Vinaya rules. And after the verdict given by these 8 bhikshus, elderly bhikshus, 700 bhikshus who were called to this council, 700, recited the Dhamma and the Vinaya Sutta again. They did it again. The same way that they did in the first council 3 months after the death of Shakyamuni. 100 years after this, they began to recite again. Now, it's not that they probably, I don't think that, this recitation has just, began only in the council. It was done many places. But these councils were important because they were resolving something very problematic, And so from this council, we began to, it was called the second council. And from this council, we began to then again get what you understand, at least what as Buddhists we understand, a purer form of the teachings of Shakyamuni. Now, it seems that the Vijjayan bhikkhus did not agree with this, and they themselves called their own, it's called the Mahaga Sangiti, their own council. And many say, at least historically speaking, that there was a schism for the first time in Buddhism in the second council. Now, no matter what the issue may be, at least for us who are studying it now, and people who are following Babasaheb, especially now, and the Buddhism that we have got, which he has given to us, these 2 councils are important to just know, and to know that to a great extent, these 2 councils try to keep the teachings of Shakyamuni as pure as possible, and resist it, especially in terms of Vinaya, the Vinaya rules, the practice rules, and to disallow any distortions in the practice. Now, after these 2 councils, there was also another council, and this another council is important because it was sponsored by King Ashoka, and it supposedly happened in 326 BC or something like that. And not only it happened in that point in time, it was presided by a very interesting bhikshu, Tissa. I've forgotten, Mogali Putta Tissa, if I'm not mistaken. So it seems that 1,000 bhikshus were chosen to participate out of 60,000 who wanted to participate. And it was under the patronage of Ashoka, Ashoka was crowned 280 years after Shakyamuni's death. So in that particular sense. And there's some very interesting discussions that took place during this particular third council. It's like when Ashoka began to provide state sponsorship, when Ashoka began to provide state sponsorship to Buddhism, and in himself converting to Buddhism, this state sponsorship led to many people coming into Buddhism, especially into the Bhikshu community, the Bhikshu Sangha, for instance. Many people started coming. And the people who were genuine and were serious also came, and people who were not so serious also came, and people who were basically probably even fooling around, they also came. And you have many of them, across the world, who probably just in the fat, probably because they get some support. And I mean, we know about this. I mean, I will not doubt the genuine intentions of the Jews, someone who take. It's like a difficult thing to do, but it seems that's exactly what happened during the time of Ashoka. And what is interesting is this infiltration that came into Buddhism at this point in time. It was felt that there was a need to cleanse this infiltration. And in trying to cleanse the infiltration, this particular so-called Third Council was called. So Ashoka sought this as a council and ordered many of these bhikshus to be expelled actually from the Sangha, for instance, from the Bhikkhu Sangha. And from here there was a lot of it was a product of very interesting knowledge. Tissa himself, there was one compilation that was produced by Mogali Putta Pitta Tissa, who basically later that compilation went into one of the texts of the Abhidhamma, which we will discuss some other time, not now, but this is to say. And from this council, all of this recitation that I told you at the beginning took place, and the grave seal of approval, and gave the seal of approval to the doctrines of Shakyamuni. So, interestingly, this third council was a little bit different from the first two councils, because this third council actually tried to kind of it was less to do with the Vinaya per se, but it is more about infiltration and many people coming in, and there was a mixture of the teaching, and people started, fooling around with the teaching and so on and so forth, and it was very important in that sense. But over and above this, there was something also very important that took place with the Third Council, because with Ashoka and the kind of state sponsorship and state support that was provided, it is from this council, the Third Council, that Buddhism for the first time was exported to various places, especially in South Asia, including Southeast Asia. So we know of people who were sent, of bhikshus and elderly bhikshus who were sent to Kashmir and the Gandhara region. People who were sent to Mysore, today's Mysore. That time it had a different name. And then we know about people who were sent, bhikshus who were sent to South India. Those who were sent to Gujarat, to the Kutch, to the Sindh region. Those who were sent to even to the Bactrian Greeks, even to the Greeks, the bhikshu was sent over. And some of them were sent to Himalayas. Some of them were sent to Myanmar. And a group, especially the son of Ashoka himself, Mahinda, and 4 or 5 of the elderly bhikshus, they were sent to Sri Lanka. So in the Third Council, what is very important to note was, for the first time, Buddhism began to export through the bhikshus, through the elder bhikshus. From this council arise the need to export Buddhism. And probably it was a little bit of a state-sponsored project. Probably Ashoka wanted to make Buddhism a state religion. But not only that, he actually now went to Myanmar, he went to the Himalayas, he went to Sri Lanka. So this trying to spread Buddhism for the first time, it looks like it was a little bit of an activity of trying to spread Buddhism in terms of ideas and practice. And this is exactly what we know Buddhism today was to a great extent a contribution of the Third Council. So this is the difference of the first two councils and the third. Now the Fourth Council is very interesting, because the Fourth Council, on the other hand, happened about 400 to 450 years after the death of Shakyamuni. And it took place in Sri Lanka. And this is very important. Now, anybody who has studied a little bit of history, and those who have read Babasaheb, will know that, from around 189 BCE, with the rise of Pushyamitra Shunga, there was a massive, Buddhism had suffered like that. It began to vanish from what was today called northern India, especially Bihar. Bihar, UP belt, especially Bihar concept, Pushyamitra Shunga, there itself vanished Buddhism. And there was, if you read Lalmani Joshi, you'll see a lot of so-called collection of historical evidence in which there was probably even some kind of a huge physical violence that was committed on many of the bhikshus. So by the time this 400 years, when the Fourth Council was called, we have to think properly. As followers of Babasaheb, we have to think properly that it was not such a simple thing. We have to problematize it a little bit. Why did it happen in Sri Lanka? Why did it happen in any part of the so-called places that were called Himalayas or Myanmar or let's say the Kutch, the Sindh, the South India? Why did it happen in any of these places 400 years after Shakyamuni's death? Why did it happen to Sri Lanka? And if you look at the narratives that is available in the Indian subcontinent about the wars, the battles, and so on and so forth, you begin to realize Sri Lanka is a very important place. Probably it's one of the last regions that defended the ideas of Shakyamuni when it was banished from India at all. Many people give some reasons saying that Sri Lanka during that point in time had gone through some 7 or 12 years of famine, and people were scared that the teachings of the Buddha would get lost because the bhikshus had to go and work. They could not recite anymore. They could not live the life of bhikshus. No one was able to support them. So in this whole kind of a tension that existed, they wanted to kind of keep these teachings alive. But the readers of Babasaheb will know that that is not such a simple. That's a simple way of looking at it. From 189 to about 25 AD or so, there have been so many things that happened in the Indian subcontinent, especially in India. Some of the text that should be referred is Babasaheb's own texts and Lalmani Joshi's work, and some of these very interesting kind of texts. Now, the Fourth Council, which was called 400 years after the death of Shakyamuni, was supported again by another king, Vitanga Mani, if I'm not mistaken, Vitanga Mani, depending on the pronunciation of this name of the king of Sri Lanka. And the argument that is generally given, the mainstream narrative that is given, which hides many things, I believe. I'm not able to consume this very, this very sanitized kind of a narrative, that it was not possible for the majority of the so-called bhikshus to remember the entire Tipitaka. And because it was not possible to, so it was thought that they should be put down in written form. I can understand the beauty of that argument, but to me, it's too sanitized. People are not speaking about the reason why it had to happen in Sri Lanka, why these Sri Lankans had to write it down, why are they so scared that they had to write it down? Is there something that was happening at that point in time in the history of India and Sri Lanka? Excuse me. Why is it that it had to happen at that point in time? So in this discussion today, I don't want to get into the debate, this kind of thing. Let's just accept the mainstream kind of as I said, a very sanitized reason given that it was difficult for the bhikshus to remember the whole of Tipitaka, and it was needed to commit them to a written form now. So this was supposedly, it took place in a very important cave. It's called the Aloka Lena, if I'm not mistaken. Very important. And there was and it was written down in palm leaves. Brittle palm leaves. It was written down in all of these suttas. And interestingly, in this gathering also we begin to have the Abhidhamma. Now that's why it's called Tipitaka. The Vinaya, the Sutta, and the Abhidhamma. So the Fourth Council basically was, at least in the Buddhist historical sense, was the most authoritative rendering of the Tipitakas, to date. What we know today is greatly built on that particular source of the Fourth Council, of what they did to write down. Now, as I told you, I don't want to problematize beyond a point, but writing down, there is a reason for this writing down. It's not so simple. Anyway. Now, interestingly, during the same time, this is what generally was called the Southern Council. But there was also something called the Northern Council, which was held in Kashmir, it seems. And this Northern Council was accepted by, other types of followers of Shakyamuni, who later came to be called the Mahayana. Okay? and the southern called Theravadas, and northern was called Mahayana. And Kashmir under the king of Kanishka, 200 years or so after the third council of Ashoka. There was also the rise of what you understand called the Mahayana school. Let's call it tradition. I'll explain to you later what is a tradition, but Mahayana tradition. And 500 bhikshus began to revise and establish the, what you understand called the words of Shakyamuni. And it seems the great commentary on the Buddha Dhamma also was kind of attributed to this particular council. But there was a lot of, in this council, there was a lot of a translation that took place in many other regional languages. The argument generally given by many of the people who have studied the history of Buddhism is that while the fourth council of the southern region, the Theravadas, stuck to Pali as a language, the northern council began to translate into many other languages, especially regional and local languages. And what we get today as the suttas and of the Mahayana is not based on that translation, but what you get from the Theras is strictly this Pali kind of a text. Now, so this council is very important, I said, and many of us who are Ambedkarites make ourselves available to both of these third council or fourth council, both the southern and the northern also. We read the northern also, but we read more the southern, I think, if I'm not mistaken, because Babasaheb used a lot of the suttas from the Pali text. See, and he himself was an expert in Pali. So he wrote a lot of his resources on the way he understands Buddhism was actually derived from the Pali text. But there's so many other concepts, Bodhisattva and many of the Lotus Sutra was so much part and parcel of the Mahayana school, which he was also very much, adept in that matter. So this is the fourth council. Now the fifth council was after long years. I mean, the fourth council, it was supposedly the southern fourth council was held around 25 or 29 BCE, and 1,000+ years later, the fifth council was held. Now this fifth council was held in the year 1871. 1871, as close as some 100 years back. So 1871, and it was held in Mandalay in Burma. Now this is and it was also sponsored by King Mindon Min. Mindon Min, that's the name of the king who sponsored this fifth council. And the objective of this particular council was to examine in detail and to see if there any alteration and distortions and anything that was dropped out from the suttas. And it was presided by three very elderly bhikshus, and it seems 2,400 bhikshus were called for this fifth council. This fifth council lasted for about 5 to 6 months. I've seen some texts saying 5 months, some texts saying 6 months. So probably 5 to 6 months. That's a good time in which to say how long it lasted. This recitation of the entire Tipitaka, in which. And the interesting part about the fifth council is that this entire Tipitakas was actually translated from the very brittle palm leaves that were there in the fourth council, and they were written down in marble slabs, and the number was 729 marble slabs. And all of these inscription in these marble slabs was done in Myanmari script. I mean, that's exactly what many people say. And it was housed in the in what they call Pitika pagodas. Pitika pagodas in Mandalay, and there's a hill called Mandalay Hill, and all of these are kind of housed in that particular place. So the fifth council is important for us within the history of Buddhism. Although this fifth council is not so much accepted by people, they don't refer to the fifth council in the Mahayana tradition. This fifth council is much more in the Thera tradition. And for us also who are much more closely linked to the Pali text, this fifth council is very important. For the followers of Babasaheb, fifth council is very important. Because in this fifth council, you begin to have what is written down, the teachings of the Buddha, whatever. And these were done in marble slabs. So 1871, that was the fifth council. And then the sixth council, of which I think is very important to reflect. The sixth council, on the other hand, was held in in the year 1954 and carried on for 2 years till 1956. And why is it so important? Why is this council, if you ask me, as someone who's tried my level best to understand, I'm not an expert in Buddhism. Buddhism is too big a subject to be an expert. But if you ask me, this year 1954 to 56 celebrated 2,500 years, and this year is very important. I mean, I'm not a person, a believer in superstition and all that, but there are so many beliefs that is there in Buddhism about why this 2,500 years is so important. Some people, you go to Sri Lanka, they say Buddhism was stated by the Theras to last for 5,000 years. Some people, you go to Burma and Myanmar, people say no, it's going to last for 2,500 years. So there was an intense need within the Buddhist community to see that we preserve the teaching in whatever way possible. And this sixth council is also very important. First of all, it was called by the government of Myanmar, the Union government of Myanmar. So it was called by a government. Before it was given by a king, now it was called by a government itself. And it was highly supported. Many of the elders within the Union government of Myanmar and its Prime Minister UNU. And UNU is very, very an interesting person. Anybody who does research in Buddhism has to go into the lives of UNU, the Prime Minister of the Union of Burma at that point in time. So it was held in Yangon, and supposedly 83 years or so after the fifth council. So, a whole cave was constructed. It's constructed Mahapasanna Guha, what they call it. A huge cave, the great cave was constructed, which actually resembled the first cave in which, the Sakyamuni caves in which the first council was held. So in the first council, the same kind of a cave was, created in order to have the sixth council. Very important. So this sixth council met from 17 May 1954 and ended in May 1956. And this was 56, as I said, to celebrate 2,500 years of the death of Shakyamuni. Now, bhikshus from 8 countries came, and around 2,500 of them were basically, they came for this sixth council. And mostly bhikshus came from the Theravada countries: Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vietnam, including India. So many of these monks, although many people were invited, if you look at the history of the sixth council, many people were invited. Every country had sent, even Japan, Korea, many people have sent, wishes, and even they attended. But this was much more identified with the Thera school, the school of the Theravada school. The Mahayana, probably all of them were there, but they didn't participate as part of the 2,500 bhikshus who were reciting the Tipitikas. Now, there was a very elder monk, elder bhikshu, called him Sayadaw, who asked the questions, and then all of these bhikshus would kind of respond. But if you go into the details of this sixth council, many things have happened before 1954. Many things have happened. There were sub-councils, there were sub-committees, and these committees worked on the Tipitikas. They went to another council, it went higher up, till before it came to the sixth council. A lot of work had been done prior to it coming to the sixth council. Now, what is interesting about the sixth council was, except for India, which is also very interesting, something to be noted, the Tipitaka was translated in the languages of all these other countries that participated. And that is very important. For the first time, the Pali Canon was translated into all of these other languages. And this was the version of the Tipitaka recognized by this particular council as being the most, authoritative in that sense, because they corrected not only they recited and corrected not only the Pali Canon, but also they recited all the others, and they saw that there was as less differences in the translation process as possible. Now, many of us who are followers of Babasaheb, followers of Buddhism, we take the sixth council and the text that arise from the sixth council as one of the most authoritative texts probably the closest to what Shakyamuni had taught. And this is very important to kind of note for us. So there's so many things to speak about, but this is the history of what you understand called the Sixth Council. From the first in Rajgir or Rajgraha, the second in Vaishali, the third in in what we know to be called Patna. Three in Bihar, three in the state of Bihar. And Bihar is a place where Buddhism has vanished. Must think seriously why this has happened. Why is it, if you look at the movement of Babasaheb, there are many people from Bihar, and many of them, and it's a very active movement also. But why has Buddhism vanished from Bihar? Three councils of Buddhism, historical council, happened in that particular state. So then the fourth one was basically held in Sri Lanka, the fifth and the sixth in Myanmar. So this is the history, brief history of the Sixth Council, and it's very important for us to understand. So in relation to the first part of the question, I guess what me and Subodh were discussing, so this is exactly what probably we need to know. This is the councils we need to know.
So, superb, sir. You have perfectly, discussed what would have been the context, but we cannot go much deeper in this session because we have time limit also. But still, the context was clear, and how these schools came out and councils came out, and there was a reason to every other council and a context to every council. But another part of our topic today is Babasaheb and his relation to this council. So, what was Babasaheb's relation with these council? How he took it, and what he took it from this council, and why? What his own reflection about these councils, if he could throw some light.
So, anybody who reads Babasaheb, I will admit that I've not completed the whole volume, so I've read volume 17 as much as I can, and mostly related to Buddhism. But I'm not a person who's very good in memory. I read and then I forget after a point. I remember the essence of what is written. While these councils were going on, 2,500 years, and then moving to 1954, 56, the Sixth Council, very important. Throughout Babasaheb's life, from 1929, 1936, 1940, it became much more clearer. Because by the time he had written, he had started writing some of the texts on who are the Shudras, who are the Untouchables. He started writing the text. In 1940, he made a very interesting statement, which was stated in the Bombay Chronicles, that Buddhism is the punishment that we have to pay for sticking to Buddhism, or untouchability is the punishment we have to pay for sticking to Buddhism. In 1940, he had began to kind of get deep into Buddhism, because he was writing, finding out the history. And Babasaheb, that was not merely a scientific kind of exercise, it was also a spiritual search for his own roots. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where this untouchability came from? And many people don't know how this untouchability has come about. So his was a search for truth. It was not merely a search for an academic search. He was not an academic historian search. His was a search for his own truth and his people's truth and the truth of this country. So in this search, he began to realize there's something about Buddhism and the history of this country. And by 1940, he started realizing that all of these things, it boils down to what you understand called the history of Buddhism, which actually was everywhere in this country and has vanished out of the blue. It just vanished. There's no Buddhism in this country. The Buddhism that remains is just some, few things here and there. And nothing to do with the ideas of the Buddha. It's all about hegemony, power, control, and a sense of whatever. I'll not go into that debate right now. So Babasaheb has already gone. And but what actually now really came forward was 1950. 1950 was an important year to kind of understand Babasaheb properly, especially in terms of Buddhism. He had just written, a very interesting kind of article which was published in Bhagavati Society. And then he was invited to come for what is called the World Fellowship of Buddhists, which was to be held in Ceylon. This World Fellowship of Buddhists is very interesting. We have to know the history a little bit. Let me just go into the history so that we get a sense. So the World Fellowship of Buddhists, which was held in 1950, which was the first, conference held by them in Sri Lanka, Ceylon, is an idea that came about starting around 1947, December 1947. It was an idea that was actually given by the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress, All Ceylon Buddhist Congress, in their 28th annual session. This session of the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress passed a resolution that a Buddhist Congress should be held that will bring people from Buddhist countries to one particular platform called the World Buddhist Congress. And this was to be held in 1950. So in 1947, there was a gathering of this particular group, and they decided that they have to put effort. And remember, we are talking about 1947, 1950, just after the Second World War. Massive misery across the world, pain, death, suffering. The world had lost its way. And many people who had written, many even people say that the ideas of the Congress and the ideas of people who were, I will go back into the Sixth Council later, but the ideas was that Christianity was, and the idea of Christianity has been produced beautiful ideas, but the Christian West is responsible for 2 world wars. So is there any hope in an idea like that itself has led the world into a state of, not disaster, but a state of utter chaos and misery and pain and suffering and all kinds of everything. So from these places, there was a lot of talk of that particular. There was a need to assert. There was a need to assert Buddhism. There was a need to say that there is something that Buddhism probably can teach the world if you listen. because the early existing ideas are not able to serve the world at all. So they had 3 objectives. This All Ceylon Buddhist Congress had 3 objectives. One was to bring closer all the Buddhists in the world, to bring them closer, especially Buddhist countries, and to exchange views and even to exchange news, about the conditions of Buddhism in their country. And the third one was to discuss ways and means whereby the Buddhists could make some contribution towards the attainment of peace and happiness in this world that has just suffered a world war, in which millions of people died. And that too, there was this idea of contributing and bringing the Buddha and the teachings of Shakyamuni into the world was to supposedly, in their understanding, to coincide with 2,500 years of the teaching. So these were the objectives of this particular Congress. You see? And in 1950, they sent invitations to many people to this World Fellowship of Buddhists, and they sent it to lots of countries, but it seems 27 countries had come to participate, sent their delegates. Okay? And it took place from 25th of May to the 6th of June of 1950. Now, what is interesting in this World Fellowship of Buddhists conference, I said we have a lot of people, 27 countries have participated. It was held in something called Temple of Truth, which is a very important place for Buddhists. And the subject was for the revival of Buddhism. It was, how do we revive Buddhism? How do we spread Buddhism? How do we talk and produce Buddhism as an idea to spread it to the world? The world is just gone from a world war. What do we do now? How do we seek peace and happiness? So, very interesting resolutions were also made. How to bring people together in this world? How to bring people? How to break barriers? This was the key thing. Now, what is interesting for us was Babasaheb was invited for this, and when he was invited to this, he did not give a speech in the first day. It seems he gave a speech. He himself said that I don't want to give a speech in the inaugural session. I want to basically just give a reflection later. And his reflections were simple, 2-3 points. he made a point like this. Some people think that, at least in India, we think it is the right time to revive Buddhism in India. First point he made was, it is the right time to revive Buddhism in India. And with that intention in mind, I have come here to observe your ceremonies. That's what he said. And then whatever rationalists might say, he made a point that ceremonies are very fundamental to religion. They're very important. And who other than Babasaheb who understands the importance of these kind of processes, you see. The second point he made was, I have come to see what extent the religion of the life and the teachings of the Buddha is observed in its pristine purity in your land, in Sri Lanka. And what extent his teachings is encrusted in superstitions and beliefs which are incongruous to Buddhism and the Buddhist doctrine. So this was the second point that he made. The third point he said was, what extent the order of the bhikshus or the bhikkhus, as established by Shakyamuni himself, has been in service to the community, and whether this particular Sangha or the Bhikshu Sangha is actually now, merely engaged in maintaining what we call the purity of life for itself. These were the summarized points made by Babasaheb in this Congress. And he made a point in the sense of asking, what extent the religion of Shakyamuni, the enlightened, the awakened Buddha, for instance, is a living force, or is it a mere tradition in your country? So the best way to know, he said, is to observe, especially the interests of the younger generation, because in the younger generation, you'll know whether religion is alive or not. So he made some very important points in this, and anybody who's interested can read a little bit more in the volumes. Is available, volume 17, if I'm not mistaken. So his whole speech was actually noted there. So in the same conference, on June 1950 or so, if I'm not mistaken, it was reported in the Sunday Times, and he had given a speech called the Rise and Fall of Buddhism. Very interesting speech. You should read that. It's there, available in volume 17. So all of this basically can be got from the report of the Ceylon conference, in the proceeding of the first section of the World Fellowship of Buddhists, which is available there. So from here onwards, when Babasaheb came back to India, on 29 September, when he was talking in Bombay's Buddha temple, in Murli, some of us who have gone there, he talked about this idea that if you were to end all troubles in India, we need to embrace Buddhism. This country is too divided, and it's divided in a structure that basically, demonizes and ridicules the other. And if this India has to go forward, it has to embrace Buddhism. There's no other religion possible from this country if we have to move together. I mean, if you want to move on your own, that's a different issue. But in Babasaheb's point is that we have to carry everybody in this country. It's a beautiful country. You have to carry everybody. To carry everybody, you need a framework that will allow everybody to participate, to bring and embrace an idea in which everybody can be seen and at least conceive. We might not be equal, but conceive as though we are equal. And not only that, we must convert to Buddhism not only because of that, it's also because of the ethical principles that this particular teaching gives. How to work for the good and the well-being of human beings and the common person especially. So that was a key point that he kind of put forward. And he declared that he would devote the rest of his life to the spreading of what he understands called Buddhism. So in this particular speech, so you began now to see, after the Ceylon Congress, you began to see Babasaheb now. Now he was talking about Buddhism in a different manner. And remember, during this time, 1950, it was just the Constitution of India had come into place. All his work that he has done, which he has invested his probably whole life and energy into writing the Constitution, he had just completed. And now he had this time to now think, how do I change this country? What is the path towards this transformation and change that will embrace every single citizen of this country, that will bring them as part of this great nation, that will bring them into the ethical framework, that will bring them into the well-being of everybody, not only a few. So he was thinking on those lines. So then you begin. And there were many other very interesting discussions, but probably anybody interested can go into the details later. And it seems in 15 February in 1953, now 1953, when he was talking in Delhi, uh, he also started speaking about this idea of, in his search for a frame that will transform this country to bring everybody together. He made a very interesting speech in 1953, and he says, India has to choose, probably, the people have to choose between the gospel of the Buddha and the gospel of Marx. Yeah. It's not that probably Babasaheb was not, was not sensitive to Marxian ideas, but he could clearly see that that theory will not work here. Clearly, he could see that the theory was not work here. So, and he made very interesting points. He says, in this particular speech in 1953, 15 Feb 1953, when he made in Delhi, not only did he point out that we have to choose between the Buddha and Marx, but the religion of Buddhism, religion other than Buddhism. If you look at religion other than Buddhism, it concentrated on the problems of the soul, of worship, but it forgets human beings. Many of these religions are so concerned with soul and worship, but they forget that actually religion is for the human being. Human being is not a sacrificial lamb in religion. Religion is meant for humans. And the Buddha, he was not very concerned with his soul and all of that. And he felt that it was unprofitable to kind of discuss this concept of soul. That's what Babasaheb was saying. So you can see here what Babasaheb has gone deep into Buddhism now. He's gone deep into it. So it seems he gave one statement. He said, when Buddha was asked whether it's a soul, he said, that's unprofitable discussion. Nobody can prove the existence of the soul. He said, Babasaheb said, the Buddha is concerned with human beings, with human suffering. I am concerned with establishing righteousness and an ethical relationship between human being and another human being. I'm not concerned about the soul and his worship. That is secondary to me. Come to me with questions of how do we resolve the physical, social, political problems that we have. That's what Baba was talking about. So again, on 27th May, a little bit later than that, in 1953, in the celebration of Buddha Jayanti, Buddhism, Babasaheb was talking. He gave a speech, and he was talking about Buddhism as a casteless, classless society. What the Buddha imagined was a casteless, classless society. And here also he said that I will devote the rest of my life to this idea, the ideas of Buddhism, to spread it. In 1954, especially 24th January 1954, he was addressing a very interesting conference of the All India Sai Devotees Convention. And in this convention, the Sai Devotee Convention, he spoke about the Buddha, and he spoke about the 5 precepts, the noble path, and Nibbana. He shared these ideas with this particular convention. Now, immediately after this convention, 24th January, by May, now this is where Babasaheb comes in. So, why is May important? Because May was the time when the 6th Council started in Burma. So, why I said all of what I said from 1950 onwards is to reveal this one historical fact about liberty, for a framework that will free his mind and his people's mind, for a framework that will transform this country, from a framework that will bring people together, in which ethics and righteousness is the fundamental premise of engagement, rather than some worship and some all of that. So May is important because May is the time when the 6th Council took place, and Babasaheb was also invited for this council. In this 6th Council, one of the most authoritative councils in the history of Buddhism, especially the Theravada tradition, Babasaheb was invited. And this first inaugural session of the 6th Council, from 17th to 24th May 1954, Babasaheb was there. So he stayed there for a while, and it seems he observed, I don't have the data of what exactly happened, because I've tried my level best to correct if the Babasaheb give any speech anywhere, any talk anywhere, but he was there, that we know. There are a lot of evidence in which Babasaheb was there. You read the text of Santakshita, you read some of the so-called text that is available, called the Light of Dhamma, if I'm not mistaken, which is a journal published by the Burma government, the Burmese government, the government of Burma. All of these evidence are there. So he was there for the inaugural session. India was represented by Vidya Lakshmi Pandit, if I'm not mistaken. There's a picture of her entering this great cave. And India also was written in a nameplate. There were many countries, hundreds of countries, their nameplates written, and they were sitting down in the caves. So when Babasaheb came back in 24th May, I don't know exactly what date he came back to India, but May what he came back. Immediately after coming back, he went on a tour to South India. And very interesting, the reason he went for this tour to visit South India, which was from 7th to 14th of July, this tour, one of the things that he wrote later in the memorandum that he submitted to the Buddha Sasana Council. Buddha Sasana basically refers to the teaching. Sasana refers to the teaching. So the 6th Buddha Sasana Council, or Sangayama or Sangiti, for instance. The 6th Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha Council, that was to refresh all these teachings that I spoke to you about the 6th Council. So in the 7th to 14th of July, Babasaheb went to South India, and he went to travel to check out what is the state of Buddhism in South India. And then he came back, and again, before anything else, he again was part of the Dr. Ambedkar Diamond Jubilee Celebration Committee, and in 28th of October 1954. And very interestingly, after he came, you can see his ideas, how it is about. By this time, after coming from the 6th Council, and he was there and listened and observed and even met many people. I mean, there are stories of meeting many people. He met the Honorable Justice Uthul, if I'm not mistaken. I've forgotten the name exactly, but so he met Dr. Soni, who had written an article and was the head of the Buddhist culture. There was an organization which I recollect. I will get back to that. So by that time, when he came back to India, after this travel of South India, he came and he gave a speech on 28th October 1950. And in this speech, beautiful speech, he says that, when he was making the speech, he says that I am a devotee of the Buddha, of Kabir and Fuli. He said, and I worship learning, I worship self-respect, and I worship character. And these are very important part of that speech. And he was speaking to his people. But anybody knows that when Babasaheb speaks, he'll come next day, it will come newspaper. Everybody will know what he says. So everybody is following. Everybody is following what he's saying from time to time. Because everybody was very tense with him, because he was the one who was shaking the structure to a great extent. Now, after this 28th October 1954, again, he went back to Burma. Now, I want to tell you one thing which you just keep in mind. This 6th Council, which happened in Burma from May of 1954 to May of 1956, was divided into 5 sessions. 5 sessions. Okay. Each session had a particular objective. Now, I will go into some other discussion, we'll go into the details of these objectives, but these sessions have these objectives. Now, this time when Babasaheb went from 3rd December to 17th of December of 1954, he went to attend a World Fellowship of Buddhists conference, which was specially invited to the 2nd session of the 6th Council. Now, this we have to bear in mind. Babasaheb was called as a delegate to participate in the World Fellowship of Buddhists, which began in Sri Lanka in 1950. Also, just to note, 1950 Sri Lanka, 1952 in Japan, 1954 as the key in the 2nd session of the 6th Buddha Sasana Council. So Babasaheb was a delegate in this specially invited World Fellowship of Buddhists, which was part of the 6th Council. And very interestingly, this International Buddhist Conference, which was there from 3rd to 6th. But if you look at the program, I do not know if you guys have. I have the text of the program of this particular World Fellowship Congress. So it went on from 3rd December to 17th December because there was a whole program. They came for 3rd to 6th. There was a conference. After that, they were taken all over Myanmar to see the whole of Myanmar. And Babasaheb stayed there. And this particular conference, he stayed with Dr. R.L. Soni, who's a very important person, at least in the history of Babasaheb's Buddhism, India's Buddhism. So Ambedkar stayed there for a few weeks, and 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. He stayed in Mandalay. And here together, it seems he was meeting a lot of Buddhists from all over the world. So in that sense, it seems that during this time when he was staying, in the discussion that he had, it was somewhat arrived at an understanding that Babasaheb should convert to Buddhism. Not only should he convert, which he was already planning to do, but he should convert in the 2500 year after the passing away of Shakyamuni. And it should be between 1956 and 1957 and not later than that. And not even before that. Remember, this was 1954. Not to rush. And that's exactly the discussion. Now, this is available. Anybody who wants to read it can find this out. It's not a thing. But it will say that during the Buddhist era of 1956-7, there was an agreement in the 6th Council that Babasaheb should now convert to Buddhism. Now, after he came back, now it's very interesting when we reach what Babasaheb actually gave as a memorandum. Babasaheb gave a very interesting memorandum, he gave a very interesting memorandum to the Buddha Sasana Council. If you look at Babasaheb's memorandum, it's available in the volume. He gave memorandum 1 and memorandum 2. And in memorandum 1, he wrote a text. It's like a little bit of an article form, but he wrote in terms of a memorandum, and he made some few points. One, he says that first point he made is that Buddhism is not alien to India. And then and Buddha talked about social equality. And Buddhism is a rational religion. So he made this first, he contextualized what Buddhism is to him. A rational religion, a religion that talks about social equality. And the Buddha is not alien to this country. The Buddha was actually from this part of this world, India. And then he said, I believe that it was important for the Buddhist gospel to have one text that is easily readable. I can understand that the Pitakas are so important. And we should keep it as pure as possible, but we need a simple text which people can read. Second point is the introduction to the ceremony of lay people. How do you introduction of a ceremony of lay people? How do you bring them in? And then how do you create lay preachers? It's not only the bhikshu or the bhikkhu or the bhikkhunis. How do you create lay preachers? How do lay people like us, for instance, begins to talk about Buddhism? What training do you give these kind of people? And what an insight that he had, beautiful insight. How do you train people like us to talk about the Buddha, to talk about the teachings? And then he talked about Buddhist religious ceremony. How do we create this ceremony? The ceremony for him was very important. From 1950, he had already said ceremony is very important. And he made one very important point, which I'm starting to see, especially people like Maharashtra, but across the country, I'm very sad to see it's, no one is listening to Babasaheb. This idea of congregational worship in Bihar every Sunday. Every Sunday, look at this. He proposed this to the 6th Council. He says, the time has come for you to do this. This is exactly where you need to move. And he also said, you need to build Bihar, you need to build schools. And he also said, you have to have essay competitions. Very interesting. We'll get into another reason why Babasaheb thinks essay competition is very important. Because he's an academic, he's a thinker, he's an intellectual, he's a philosopher. He's an artist. For him, working with people's mind is very important. Just talking is not one thing, but writing down. That's why I used to always say Babasaheb is the insight he had. How to turn his people from mere, oral and recipients of knowledge into the producer of knowledge. And I have been telling this to many people. We have to do that. Because many people, one day, one person came to me and said, essay competition, what will you do with this essay competition? You're just wasting your time. You don't realize what Babasaheb was thinking, the insights he had. How do I turn my people into producers of knowledge? How do they write down? Because the minute you commit to writing, your mind will start moving. As long as you're just a recipient, you're just listening, you can't even digest half the things that people are saying. So look at these ideas. And the second memorandum was especially his report that came from his travel to South India. And that is very important to know. So in this sixth council, when he submitted this, and I told you Dr. Soni, R.L. Soni is very important. He was the director-in-chief of the World Institute of Buddhist Culture in Burma, you see. So this person and Dr. Soni, I mean, no one spoke. After he came back from the sixth council, no one said anything about Babasaheb converting and all that. He himself didn't say anything. But R.L. Soni came out with an article in the life of Buddha, in the life of, I've forgotten this, I have this text, this journal that he publishes, he publishes a journal from this World Institute of Buddhist Culture. And in that it says, all the scheduled castes, we call all the scheduled castes to convert. I've forgotten the exact title of this article, but of that particular kind he said, So from this council, I think what is very important to note is that Babasaheb was part and parcel of the sixth council. Can you imagine, for anybody of us who have read the history of Buddhism, can you imagine? It's like saying Babasaheb was there during the time of the third council where Ashoka was. It's like saying that he was there in the fourth council when it was written in palm leaves, and he was the main person who submitted a memorandum. And this memorandum is very important. The so-called Honorable Justice U Chand Thun, if I'm not mistaken, that's how we pronounce it, even mentioned in one of his speech, there was a day after Babasaheb left, there were 2,500 Tamilians who converted to Buddhism in Rangoon. Okay. And the Justice U Chand Thun, for instance, he made a mention of Babasaheb, and he says that one of the reasons he mentioned like this. He said, Dr. Ambedkar, who attended the Third World Fellowship of Buddhist Conference, held in 1954, he and some of the Tamil Buddhist leaders who were there available wanted to establish a Buddhist school at Dala. There's a place called Dala. I don't know much about this place, but that's what they say. And educate 500 Tamils towards Buddhism. So one of the key person of the sixth council, Justice U Chand Thun, for instance, he even mentioned, why the memorandum of Babasaheb and the contributions to the, had given rise to even intervention that was taking place. So, as followers of Babasaheb, we must understand this connection, his contribution to the sixth council. Can you imagine 200 years from now when people look back, they will say, probably when the seventh council will start, when they write the history, especially when we write history, we have to write the history that he was there in the sixth council. In the history of 2,500 years, there was one man, after 2,500 years of Shakyamuni's passing away, was part and parcel of that council to resurrect Buddhism, to bring back Buddhism to its pristine form, to spread Buddhism in the place in which it has actually vanished. No one in the sixth council even mentioned that we will bring Buddha back to India. There was one man who said that I will bring back Buddhism and the teachings of Shakyamuni to India. Now, think about the significance of this process. You have to think of it. It is not such a simple thing. And people like us who look at 2,000, 3,000 years, we realize the significance of these events. Now, interestingly, when he came back, 5 months after he came back from Burma, he reinvented and somewhat registered the Indian Buddhist Society. That happened in 5 months after he came back from Burma. He did this, and then on 25th December, we all know, 1955, he went to Dehu, and he took that. He said that 1,200 years. Look at this, 1,200 years after the fall of Buddhism, he told the people who was there in that Dehu Vihar, the honor of establishing the image of the Lord Buddha had fallen to his people, to him and his people. Many people say, oh, his people means Mahar. No, his people doesn't mean Mahar. It has fallen to his people. And it was a great event and would undoubtedly go down in the history of this country. I've seen Sangharakshita writing, giving a very different version to this kind of a thing. But for me personally, It just strikes me, the responsibility to spread the message of the Buddha of peace and tolerance of thing, it has fallen to his people. We are his people. So a very important message, and that place is still there. I one day passed through that place and got a chance to see. So especially after 26th December, and we all know that he gave a talk on 12th May 1956. He gave a talk about, I think BBC talk, why I like Buddhism. People are asking why I like Buddhism. He gave a talk there. And we all know that 14 October 1956, he embraced the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So there are many writings on that, but this 14 October 1956 also is significant from another perspective, seen from an Indian perspective. But I'm more, at least for this discussion with Subodh, I'm more interested to kind of give you a sense of his location in the 6 historical councils of Buddhism. So everybody knows that by 20th November 1956, he had also gone for another world conference, Buddhist Council conference in Kathmandu, where he gave the speech Buddha called Marx. It's called the World Buddhist Council. And in this council, there were many people who came from all over the world, and many Mahayana, bhikshus and followers of Mahayana also was part of this council. So in 2 years, 1954 and 1906, he had attended the 6th council of the Theras and also the World Buddhist Council in Kathmandu, which we have many from the Mahayana school. So in another discussion we will go, when he was asked this question whether you are Mahayana or Hinayana or Theravada, for instance, he said that I was Navayana. So he didn't say that out of the blue. He didn't say that simply in order to kind of deflect the question of the reporter. He was very much, he had embraced both these ideas, and he knew these ideas very closely, very well. So probably this is another discussion for another time. But this is exactly the significance of Babasaheb, especially for understanding him as part of the larger historical tradition of 2,500 years of Buddhism. Don't reduce Babasaheb to just one isolated event of a person who is against some religion and want to convert to something else. No. That is too small a way of looking. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important. Everybody do it. But you must locate Babasaheb in this historical evolution of Buddhism itself. Remember that. That is very important. Okay, yes, so what, any last few questions? Yeah.
Sir, you took me to a whole historical, and I could imagine how Babasaheb must have been traveling to places and what it all was going in his mind, and he was engaging, and not just engaging, he was important and was an important speaker on those events and one of the key members or key persons. And despite the conversion thing was there, people wanted people from Buddhist background, but Babasaheb, despite not having like officially converted, but still as a scholar, Buddhist scholar and knower of this tradition or this culture, he was always called to these kind of meetings and this very much important 6th council, as you mentioned. Sir, we are running out of time, and just have a final question, or what we can say, what will sum up today's discussion. That we see, in spite of these councils where people used to come up and discuss, we find there are so many differences in Buddhism, and so many schools have come up, and even the people like us, we are even somewhat clueless about the teachings. These come up in time, and sometimes some things are very much important. But how do you see these differences in Buddhism?
I think very important question. I think another way to kind of somewhat look at it is in Buddhism, we all take refuge to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. I think this is fundamental. if you have not taken refuge, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, what you call, it's like a window, this Buddha Dhamma Sangha is like a window. It's like a door. Let's just use a door. If you don't open the door, okay, you cannot see it from a Buddhist frame of reference. So if you don't take refuge to this door called the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and remember, Buddha Dhamma Sangha, we don't take refuge to Buddhism. Yeah? And we have to be a little careful about this. Don't reduce the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, Tiratma. Don't reduce it to the Buddha. No. We can discuss later what the Buddha, what the Dhamma, and what the Sangha is. The theoretical, philosophical, methodological sense. But at this point in time, let's just say, if you don't take refuge to this, you can't open it, you can't see anything at all. I've seen many people talking about Buddhism, but they have not taken refuge. So they don't even understand, because they are not even located in that frame of reference. So they talk theoretically. Because the minute you take refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, many other realities will begin to open to you. So the first point that needs to be noticed, you have to take. But in taking refuge to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, this is not a rigid framework, you see. It's not a rigid framework. If I take refuge, the minute I take refuge, I begin to see the world in a particular manner. Now, what is fundamental to this? This taking refuge of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha does not require you to alter your own contextual reality. Instead, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha is like, as I used to say, is like water poured into a plant, and this plant begins to grow. This Buddha Dhamma Sangha doesn't require you to know. You have to grow only in this particular manner, otherwise I'll beat you. You have to do only this, you have to grow only to the right, you have to grow only to the left. No. You grow whatever you want, but grow into a beautiful flower. So Buddhism, in that sense, wherever it has gone, and anybody and any culture and any society and any community who has taken refuge, what it has only done is it's just like water and sunlight falling into that culture, and the culture becomes beautiful. It goes to Tibet, Tibetan Buddhism arises. It goes to China, Chan Buddhism arises. Pure land arises. It goes to Japan, Nichiren Buddhism arises. It goes to Japan, Zen Buddhism arises. It goes to Thailand, Thai Buddhism arises. It goes to America. So first thing that we need to understand about Buddhism is that Buddhism is not this rigid framework. There is a God, and then this God says this, and we have to do that. No. You have to take first refuge. And if you don't take refuge, nothing will open to you. The door will be closed anyway. So in this process, now I will explain this in another discussion, because this is one point we have to understand properly about why Buddhism. In this particular process, every context gives rise to an idea. Every context gives rise to a way of looking. Every context gives rise to a meaning-making process. What meaning Tibetans make of Buddhism is their search for their own meaning in their culture. What the Burmese make meaning in the framework of taking refuge is related to their culture and their reality and their historical experience, and their contextual experience. It is from this kind of an understanding that what you understand called the Mahayana school and the Theravada school has emerged. Now we can get into the debates for what, this is a pure teaching and that teaching is something else. We can get to that debate some other time. But first thing we need to know in the methodological sense is that Buddhism is something that actually rises from, born out of the experience of people the minute they take refuge. And that experience does not simply demand that tomorrow you should wear only this kind of cloth, tomorrow you should wear this kind of pant, you should wear only this kind of cap. No. You wear whatever you want, doesn't matter. But flower into something beautiful. It is that reason that in Buddhism we say we have traditions. Like the Mahayana is a big tradition, it's a massive school. And let's look at it as a knowledge framework. Mahayana is a knowledge framework. Theravada is a knowledge framework. And these are what we call traditions in Buddhism. But in each of these traditions, there are many schools. So in Mahayana, you have the Zen, you have Nichiren, you have Chan, you have Pure Land, and then even you have the Vajrayana, you have the Tantrayana, you have so many, and interestingly, the Vajrayana school has over a period of time developed and produced so much knowledge that they have now started even to be identified as a tradition themselves. Many people in the world are speaking about Vajrayana as a tradition, equal to Mahayana and Theravada. But for a long time, Vajrayana was a school within the Mahayana tradition. Now, what is important here is that why are these schools not in schools, or why are these traditions not in conflict with each other at all? That's the question to ask, you see. So the question you ask me, why are there's so many of these? Why are they not, why so? Why so is because Buddhism is such a framework. When you take refuge, it flowers you. Buddhism is like 1,000 flowers, with their own color, beautiful colors, and their own fragrance. There is nothing like a Buddhism. There is Buddhisms. There cannot be a Buddhism. We have to be careful with this idea called Buddhism. Singular. Buddhism is diverse. It is beautiful. It works with people. It cleanses people from within. It is not a rigid following that we have to sit down, stand up, and do particular actions in a particular manner only. I don't buy that kind of an argument, because I can see, and this insight has come from Babasaheb. And many people who don't understand him tend to look at him as, oh, he started some new ideas about Buddhism, which is a protest kind of a religion, Protestantism, nothing like that. What Babasaheb simply said was this: my context, my reality, my people are suffering in a manner that you can't even begin to imagine. And from that context, we embrace the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and from that context will arise a particular one more of these beautiful Buddhisms across the world. Are you willing to listen? That's a different issue. Many people don't want to listen, especially these colonial mindset types. They'll come only to check you as data, and they will come to teach you. It's like the colonial mindset can only teach, they can't learn. While people like us can only learn and we can't teach. This is not what Buddhism is all about. I've seen many people, they come, see these white folks, friends of mine, when they come only to teach, not to learn anything at all. And if it doesn't fit their framework, they don't want to listen to you. I used to say, what is this? What kind of Buddhism is this? You can only teach, you can't learn. If there is one thing that Buddhism tells you, and one thing that Shakyamuni tells us, is just be open to learning all the time. Never be so rigid that your perspective is the best. Your perspective will always transform. You're just nothing but a process. You're a water in an ocean that is constantly flowing, a river constantly flowing. So we can get into that discussion in the next gathering, but this is a little bit which I want to say. And this is very important for us, never to see Mahayana or Theravada as in conflict, in tension, as this school is better and that school. No. Each of them arose from a certain context of experience. And Buddhism goes to forget about culture, it goes to the individual. Every individual practices a particular type of Buddhism here. No two individuals will practice the same Buddhism. They might embrace the same framework, but they will not practice in the same manner. What is going on in me, what's going on in you, how do you know? Only you know now. And you have to develop the answers to your problem. I can be a mirror to help you out and point you to the direction of where you should go. But at the end of the day, you have to develop your own answer for your own problem. How can you use my answer to resolve your problem? Is it possible or what? No, it's not possible. Anybody who has done work, especially in psychology, and people like us who work in the domain of counseling, we know I cannot be the answer to your problem. You have to find answers. I can help you and facilitate and create a mirror for you to reflect what is going through in your life. But you can't use my answers to resolve your crisis. So Buddhism goes to the level of the individual. This is very... Anyway, I think we have spoken a lot, and I think that...
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like the scheduled session should go on, and because we have so much insight and our students are benefiting out of these discussions. And sir, thank you so much for guiding us and opening this inaugural session of the School of Buddhist Studies in Digital Nalanda. And we look forward to see more sessions in this school and more periodic sessions in the coming times. And a lot of engagement, a lot of stuff is there, and also students will surely benefit from it. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you again from Digital Nalanda.
It's important, Subodh, before we go, this is a practice of paying homage to
Sir.
the way we do, just to say a few words, one line just to say, in order to end our gathering today. And this is something that many of our students in Nalanda and also people who are following the practice of Babasaheb should do. Just one line. Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Okay. So thank you so much, Subodh. Let's keep our school going. I think it's very important, and this is a very important day for us.
Yes, sir.
And Babasaheb is the not only the emancipator, but the path giver, the one who's showing us where to move. Time has come now to produce knowledge. Time now to engage in the details of Buddhism. We can't just rely on others to teach. We have to generate knowledge from inside the community, and we'll move on that direction. Okay.
Sir.
So
Looking
thank you so
forward,
much.
Sir.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, bye,
Thank you,
bye,
sir.
bye.
Bye, bye, sir.
Bye.